What's something effed up you witnessed as a child that you were oblivious to until you grew up?
When I was 5 or 6, my mom used to never want to get out of bed and just kept saying she was sick. Finally, my stepdad took her to a hospital, where she stayed for nearly a month. I thought it was so cool that her hospital let her do arts and crafts all the time, plus she got better and started doing arts and crafts with me too when she got home. I remember telling her that I wished I could go to the hospital and draw all day. She sat me down and told me that she hoped I would never get sick like she did, but if I do, there's nothing wrong with needing help to get better, even if you have to go somewhere for a little while to do it. It wasn't until I was probably 12 or 13 and didn't want to get out of bed myself that it clicked that the hospital she had gone to was a mental health hospital. But because of her, I've never felt shame about needing therapy when things are getting bad, or even just to maintain a healthy mindset.
When I was little, a girl I met on vacation talked about sexual stuff a lot. When my parents found out, they didn't want me to play with her anymore. Now that I'm an adult, it occurs to me that there was probably a reason as to why she talked about that stuff so much.
My really odd babysitter got fired after she broke her glass table. I was playing with her son in another room when we heard a crash. She actually used to lock us in his room a lot. I don't recall much, but I remember a big commotion soon after. I remember my dad screaming at my mom that night about how I was banned from going over there ever again and how it was my mother's fault for letting me go over there, which I didn't understand. Grew up to find out that babysitter was shooting up and fell through that glass table. Neighbors had heard the crash and rushed over and found her high as a kite with 2 kids locked in a room, me and her kid.
Damn, I have a similar story. My babysitter was having trouble with her BF and tried to commit suicide while watching my sister, brother and I. My brother and I were 3, sister 4. She drank bleach and bee spray. I can vaguely remember looking at her foaming mouth in curiosity. My sister had the wherewithal to call my mother at work and tell her that Audrey was foaming out of her mouth because of what she drank. My mother called 911 and Audrey made it. Years later she asked my mother for a reference, lol open mouth smile.
When I was probably around 4 to 6 years old, I used to walk my grandma upstairs at her house every time we visited. She said she liked holding my hand. When I went to her room, she'd always compliment my shirts and be like, "What's this on your shirt here called?" And I'd say, "Oh, that's Winnie the Pooh," or whatever I was wearing. And she'd go on to tell me stories about the character or talk a bit about it. When I was 16, I learned she'd been blind for years. She'd ask me to hold her hand up the stairs so that I could help guide her to her room. She'd ask what was on my shirt, BC, she could feel a pattern on it. IDKY, but that kind of made me feel both sad and very loved. Like she couldn't see anymore, but she never wanted to let me worry about it and still managed to compliment what I was wearing all the time. She passed away while I was still very young, but those memories stuck like glue. Edit. Waking to everyone's replies on this post was so nice. Thanks everyone for all the love for grandma. _. I'm glad people found this post heartwarming in the midst of the rest of this thread. I guess I found it effed up just BC while she was alive. I thought I would have wanted to know BC. There were times where I, as a 5-year-old, would think to myself, man's grandma always forgets who Mickey is, lol, and when I later found out I remember thinking, oh god, I'm such an idiot, or felt bad that I thought she just had bad memory or something. My immediate thought was I wish I would have known so I could have given her even more love. But as I got older, almost 30 now, I realized it probably made her really happy to hang out with someone for a while who didn't ever think of the disability and just spent time with her. So yeah, thank you again. I appreciate all the awards too. I know those cost money, so wow, thank you.
Wow, this one was a breath of fresh air after some of the other heavy stuff on this thread.
On a day out with my dad when I was little, I was playing in the park with a girl same age as me. I didn't know her, but she was on her own. Me and my dad left after an hour or so, leaving the girl on her own again. Obviously my dad asked where her parents were, etc. Later on that night there was a big story on the news about a girl who had been abducted, and all my family kept asking me questions about this little girl. It went right over my head at the time, being about 5 years old. 40 years later I still think about her.
Finding out that breaking a cup or spilling a drink wasn't a big deal was quite an eye-opener. Watching my girlfriend look at me like I'm nuts while I apologize for 20 minutes about dropping a glass of water made me reevaluate a lot of my childhood.
A few weeks ago I was cleaning up. Stacking dishes into the sink, I accidentally broke a glass. I inwardly braced for the smallest fraction of a second to be yelled at and insulted, if not downright hit for breaking a glass. I'm in my late 40s and live alone. That kind of stuff stays with you for decades.
Being around people who don't explode over every mistake helps a lot, but when living alone the first time I may or may not have poured a few glasses of water on the floor because there was no one around to stop me. Hard to say if it really helped, but it felt good at the time.
Went to a friend's house on the weekend to play video games at the age of about 10. We had a good time and played a lot of games on the PS2. His mom came upstairs from the basement to ask if we wanted food. I turned around and said yes please, and before I could finish saying please I noticed she had a black eye. I asked my friend what happened to his mom's face and he said, I can't say. 10-year-old me just said oh okay, and we proceeded to play video games. I didn't realize until I was about 19 this happened.
I feel so sad both for her and your friend, who knew but had been told repeatedly he couldn't tell anyone.
I remember having a friend in high school whose parents were practically absent for most of his childhood. We used to make jokes about how jealous we were that he got to do basically whatever he wanted. He could sleep over at anyone's house any day of the week, and never had a curfew. We got close and I started coming over to his house, which was very dirty to say the least. All the food was microwavable or non-perishable, junk foods. They had a turtle tank in the kitchen between the sink and the stove, dishes always stacked, trash everywhere, etc. My friend would jump at any opportunity to stay at our houses whenever our parents allowed, but I had to stop after a while because my friend didn't clean up after himself often. One day, my mom got upset after he left breadcrumbs all over our couch. She said, he should know better, what would his parents think? Well Mom, I don't think they'd think much. I proceed to explain the conditions of his house. My mother was shocked and insisted he sleep over whenever he needed, but only if I made sure he learned to clean up after himself and was well fed.
For some reason, this happens very often. I had several friends when I was growing up with similar mannerisms: doesn't clean up, wears dirty clothes, smells, and never wanted me to visit their houses. I always thought it was weird that everyone wanted to come to my house and hang out. Everyone would come over, and my mom would always have food for everyone. At some point when I was in high school I had to do a project with one of them. I visited the friend's house and quickly discovered their parents were nowhere to be found. Dirty, no food, parents gone for days. It was terrible, and I always made a point to ensure they understood my house was open if they needed a place to stay or needed anything else.
My mom used to let me watch cartoons late at night in her room as long as I didn't turn around or be too loud. I would always hear her flicking a lighter but didn't think too much about it. Years later I found out she was smoking meth right behind me and blowing it out the window. She would use me as an excuse as to why she was awake if my stepdad woke up and caught her.
My father used to take my sister and I to our uncle's house and would shoot up on heroin and pass out on the couch. Didn't realize until much later he wasn't even our uncle, just a guy he knew. It's a miracle nothing happened to us tbh. This is now my highest upvoted comment. Yikes.
My uncle withdrawing from DG. He was always the fun, loud, crazy uncle. I was around 10 and my mum and I came home from somewhere, and when we pulled up he was sitting outside and said he needed a place to stay. My mum had to work the next day and he and I were both hanging out at the house, and I could tell he didn't feel well and was dry heaving. It was really scary. I asked him if I should call 911 and he said no, he'd be okay. I had no idea he had D problems until I became an adult. He passed away not too long ago from liver failure.
I'm so sorry. He was a great uncle, especially for keeping his problems separate from his relationship with you.
Yeah, I always thought he was great. He was goofy and always making all the kids laugh. It wasn't until my cousin and I were older, and we were talking, that I found out how he was regularly. She was the troubled teen that would run away to go sleep with her boyfriend. Little did I know she ran away because she walked in on him shooting heroin. Great uncle, bad dad, husband. We're all flawed and he obviously had his demons. Sad all around. Edited to change heroin to heroin, tears of joy.
My mom attempting suicide in front of me on more than one occasion, as well as being in the car as my dad drove her to the hospital after said suicide attempts.
I have the same experience. My mum injected poison into her to try and kill herself right in front of me. I was only 3 at the time and always believed one day she just got sick and got a brain injury. It wasn't until I was 12 that my dad told me that she tried to kill herself.
My neighbor's body just hanging by the window. Kids my age got to see it too since we were playing outside.
Reminds me of this girl from my hometown that committed suicide. She tied one end of the rope to her bedpost, tied the other around her neck and jumped out of her second-story window. Neighbors walked outside and just saw her hanging outside of the house. F'ed up poo.
Geez, now this reminds me of that time one of the students, same batch as me, committed suicide just behind their building and her best friend was the one who saw her.
Around age 5 to 7 I was out shopping with my mom when a man grabbed my hand and went to walk out of the shop with me. I didn't realize it wasn't my mom at first, but then I realized I didn't recognize him and pulled away, went absolutely dead weight. He looked down at me and said something like, "Come on Tommy, your mom's been looking everywhere for you," when suddenly my sister and mom came to the rescue and he apologized, said he thought I was his nephew, and immediately left. Looking back, he was definitely a pedophile or kidnapper who was trying to take me to his van or something. I distinctly remember the entire shop full of people stopping and staring, and later the person working there allowing me to have a toy for free. I think it was his way of making me feel better, though I had no idea what had happened at the time.
From 4th to 6th grade, I would go to a friend's regularly. For most of the friendship his mom was super nice and engaged with us as kids, while his dad had always been this mysterious person at a high-powered job that everyone tiptoed around once he got home. My friend's attitude started changing near the end of our friendship, being abusive to his dog that he used to be obsessed with and overall high-strung. Parents were a little off compared to before. I stayed for dinner one night like I had before many times and his mom sits down with a black eye. I was confused, like, how did she get hurt? It was a bit awkward, but the dad was there and those meals were more about finishing up than chatting. I guess everything was always less fun when he was around. My friend was not the same as he was before. More aggressive and that wasn't my style. Our friendship just kind of waned off. I didn't realize till many years later that his dad was likely an abusive asshole, was hitting his wife, and maybe his sons. I'll never forget the weird anxiety that filled the house in those last few months, and that my presence may have been a kind of reprieve period where the dad had to play it cool. That anxiety did end up pushing me away, and looking back I hope my friend, his brother, and mom got out of the situation.
When I was 5, my dad would take me to the park on a Sunday sometimes. Sometimes he would then take me to this woman's house nearby. They would sit me in front of the TV and put on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Then they would go upstairs. I never made the connection they were having sex because I didn't know what sex was. My mother left him anyway when I was older, for being a gambler and a drunk. I think about it now and again how oblivious I was.
When I was about 10, my dad offered to buy me candy and stopped at a store to run in. We had a long drive back and I asked where the candy was. He said in the bag in the back but that he'd get it for me when we got home since he was driving. I said, "It's okay, I can reach it," and as I reached for it he slapped me and yelled that I can wait until I got home. My father had never hit me before that, and never did again after. The most confusing part to me was the look of utter sadness and shock on his face after he hit me. My dad was an alcoholic and killed himself before my 18th birthday. It wasn't until I was older that I understood he had bought a bottle of vodka and forgot to place it in its own bag, or that I hadn't seen him drinking water all those times he disappeared to his truck and I snuck to the window to watch where he went.
I actually relate with this deeply, as not too long ago my own mother would go drinking vodka in her truck, claiming she wants to kill herself. Thankfully she's still alive, even from a previous suicide attempt. I also relate with that about how you were hit. Of course she never hit me, but you can tell something is wrong when someone gets defensive or angry. I'm sorry for your loss.
I was 5 years old the first time my mother told me she was going to kill herself and it was all my fault. But also later in the same day that I'm the only reason she didn't kill herself. That probably wasn't the actual first time either, just the first I remember. But whatever you experience as a kid is normal because you have nothing to compare it to. You have no idea you're being head F'd. I got to *41* before I realized, in fact, it is not the job of the eldest sibling to shield the younger siblings from their parents. It took my son saying, "But you've never done anything even a bit like that to us," for it all to click into place.
A guy tried and failed to kidnap our neighbor's baby over a $20 debt. We lived in Navy housing in Charleston, South Carolina when I was a kid. This was in the 80s. We were at the neighbor's house. This neighbor owed someone else in the neighborhood $20 and hadn't paid. While we were all in the living room, dining area, we heard the loud sound of shattering glass come from the baby room. The baby cried out and everyone rushed down, but the guy was gone before we got there. The guy apparently tried to pry open a locked window with a putty knife, and pressure on the frame caused the glass to shatter. The dude left the putty knife and the note he'd written in the windowsill when he took off. The baby was fine. I heard the grown-ups talk about knowing exactly who it was. I also remember them deciding not to call the police and to go deal with it in person.
Oh, dat man dead.
I was in the basement of my friend's place with his dad and sister. Without warning and no reason I can remember, the dad grabbed my friend and his sister by the neck, thrusted him up into the air and pinned him against the wall. I had no idea what to do. He let them go and I was like, maybe I should go home now. I don't think I even told my parents when I got home.
I saw a girl standing on the wrong side of the barrier holding onto the railing when my family drove over a bridge and some people on the path talking to her. I thought nothing of it and just wondered how she was going to get back on the right side. I used to hang onto the railing and walk on the wrong side of a path at school that was about a meter high, so I just thought she was mucking around in a more extreme adult-level way, chatting to her friends. I didn't realize until I remembered it randomly as an adult, and I have no idea what the outcome was. There's been petitions to raise the height of the safety barriers on that bridge to reduce the number of suicides, but unfortunately nothing has been done. Mum and her boyfriend took me to a dodgy neighborhood to see a friend. Years later I realized it was actually a crack house and he was a dealer.
I've sat in the car for hours as my mom got high.
My dad carrying my mom down the stairs when she overdosed on pills trying to kill herself. A few years later she rented a convertible Mustang and I wanted to check it out. My dad came out of the house screaming at me to get away from her. She left and the police showed up. I later learned that she was schizophrenic and had tried to kill me. The reason she tried to kill herself was to save me before she actually tried. Eventually the disease won the battle and her brain turned to madness.
That's terrifying, and I hope you have been able to heal. My mom is schizophrenic also. It's something that no one will understand unless they've lived it.
When I was 5 or 6 I lived in a complex with 8 units. One day my dad asked to jump through one of the unit's bathroom windows, run through the house and open the front door. I didn't really want to, as an old lady lived there that I didn't know well and thought I'd get in trouble if caught. Anyway, off I go, through the window and make my way to the front door. As I get to the lounge room, she was on lounge chair slumped with eyes open looking straight at me. Scared the crap out of me. It was creepy, but more so remember thinking I had been caught breaking into her house. Anyway, open front door and run past my parents and neighbors straight home. Ambulance came not long after but didn't really click what was going on. I later realized in my teens she was dead, apparently had been for a few days. Everyone in the complex was worried about her, so used me to get into the house to check on her welfare. 30 plus years later can still picture it. Edit, wow, this really blew up, thanks for the upvotes. For those that commented below, yep, police was probably the better thing to do, but it was the late 80s in Australia, things were different back then. My dad had a bad habit of locking us out of the house, so it wasn't the first time I had squeezed through the bathroom window. All the units were identical, public housing, so think he figured she would be in bed and I would be right. I do remember being really upset at the time, but honestly thought I was simple in trouble. I don't know if it scarred me, although it's one of those things I'll never forget.
I thought your dad was going to rob her place, so this is better? I am sorry this happened to you though.
When I was younger I never really saw my 2 oldest brothers because they were always in and out of jail. One day my mom tells me they will both be released on the same day and I'd get to see them when I got home from school, 1st grade. As I got home I raced to the front door to see them finally, only to see my brother and top of the other one trying to stab him in the face with a kitchen knife on the couch. My body instantly froze and my mom shoved me out of the way to separate them. I never understood why my brothers would fight like that until I grew up realizing my kitchen knife wielder brother was addicted to meth and would steal from us to get some DG, so my brother had confronted him, ensuing the scuffle. I'm 25 now. My brother is still addicted to meth and in and out of jail, currently in RN. My other brother got his life together and has made a living for himself. It's not something oblivious, but as a child I didn't understand why this would happen. I still get nightmares or flashbacks about this fight till this day.
When I was a kid, somewhere below 10, I ended up on an AOL chat room with someone that claimed to also be a kid. While I was somewhere below 10, he claimed to be 14 or 13, I can't quite remember. Well, he gave me this phone number to call him on, and told me that if his voice sounded really deep, it's just because he has a deep voice for his age. Still in the chat room, he then tried to find out where I lived, which thankfully I didn't tell him. I did know my address by heart at that point, but just didn't feel like telling him. I told him I'd give him a call in a few minutes, I logged off, and I proceeded to grab the house phone to call the number. I don't know if I entered the number wrong, or what, but this automated voice comes up and asked if I wanted to accept some charges for the call. If there was one thing I knew, it was that if I had any money charged to the house, I would have gotten a good ass whooping, so I NOPED out of that call pretty quickly. I never wanted to call another number that someone gave me online again. It wasn't until a few years ago that I realized he was an online predator, trying to find his way to a very young child. Edit. Wow, this is the most upvotes and comments I've ever gotten on any post ever. As far as the comments go that relate to my post, I'm very sorry for those of you who have similar or worse stories. You never deserved that. You're not alone. Thanks everyone for the responses and all. The internet can be a very scary place. Be sure that if you have any children in your life that you care for and love, you let them know what good internet practices are, and warn them of the harms that can come to them. Heart, much love and care to all of you.
My dad had a rare type of cancer that affected the bones in his face and jaw. When I was 5 years old, he had a tumor the size of a softball removed from one cheek. They removed his cheekbone, bottom jaw, nerves, lymph nodes, everything. The surgeon did a horrible job with the skin graft and spaced the stitches way too far apart. A couple weeks after his first operation, the wound got infected. I remember my mum and I were coming home after school one day and it was unusual to see that my dad was also home that early. He was getting out of his car as we were pulling up to the house, and the stitches on his face had started to rip open, the infected gunk and his skin started falling out of his face as he ran into the house. That was just one of the many horrible things that happened while my dad was sick. Being a kid and witnessing that level of gore so frequently desensitized me to it. I didn't realize how bad it was growing up in a household with a dying parent until I was much older. Holy moly, seeing his face rip open like that was not part of a normal childhood at all. Edited a typo. He had not has cancer. He died a decade ago.
Your poor dad. I can't even begin to imagine how painful that would be.
My mother, in AD-induced, postpartum depression mental break, screaming into the phone that if my dad didn't come home right at that second, she was going to kill us kids. We weren't even doing anything because we knew she wasn't completely okay mentally. I remember after screaming into the phone, she slammed the phone into the wall holder, ran, hobbled to the kitchen, and grabbed a big chef's knife. I grabbed my newborn brother while my younger sister grabbed our youngest sister and hid under a table where she couldn't reach us because she was still healing from having a cesarean section and as such, couldn't bend over. I thought that kind of behavior was fairly normal and that all mothers wanted to end their children after having a baby for the longest time. I didn't realize how messed up that was until I was a teen. I was 6 when that story occurred. I will be 26 this year. My mother has been clean for at least the last 5 years. She does not remember that night, and if she does, she won't talk about it. Honestly, I don't blame her for not wanting to talk about it. It was a pooty time in her life, and she used DG to cope, escape her feelings and thoughts. Edited because I posted it while I was removing a sentence.
When I was about 9, I went fishing by myself at a fairly secluded spot. Next minute this guy sits down next to me. He starts chatting with me. Frankly, I was a bit annoyed with him intruding on my solitude and I was a bit surly. Anyway, suddenly he says, "What's that?" and points to an unopened condom packet that has magically appeared on the ground between us. I say, "I don't know. It's a condom. Do you know how to use one?" He asked me. I just shrugged and said something like, "No idea." I did my best to ignore the guy, not because I felt threatened, just annoyed. Eventually he got up and left. Years later I remembered the encounter and realized I'd probably had a brush with a pedo.
Reminds me of the time I was eating cereal at a babysitter's house and her grown man of a son comes up to me and take the spoon and starts eating my cereal. Then he's like, "You're a beautiful little girl," and starts playing with my hair and stroking the buttons in my overalls. I was so mad he had the audacity to take my spoon and eat my breakfast that I pushed the bowl towards him and said, "That's my cereal, but now I don't want it." 23 years later I realized this man was trying to groom me to either molest me or worse. This wasn't my only run-in with him, so I told my mum and I never saw that babysitter again. Also, screw that babysitter, she was always disappearing when her son was around me or any other kid. Now I realize she was letting him do what he wanted with the kids. Edit, the babysitter would also like to play a game with us little kids. It always involved her son. She would line us up and pull our pants down, and whoever pulled up their pants last didn't get to go outside and had to help her son clean up the bedrooms. I always made sure to wear overalls or a play suite because if this, I knew it was messed up even at 4 years old. The days my mum was washing my overalls or play suites I would throw a fit and cry and say I didn't want to wear anything else. She would either keep me home or put on some of my dirty ones on. My dad always said, "If anyone touches you and they said don't tell anyone or I'll hurt your family, just know they won't." And I asked him why and he said, "Because I would kill them before they got the chance. F that old bitch and her pedo-ass son."
When I was in 7th grade, a boy from my class got kicked out of the school, reason being, at the time, he had bullied an 8-year-old boy so much, that he and his family had to move. A few years later, when I was in high school, I was later told that he didn't just bully him, he had straight up RPD him at the boys' locker room.
When I was about 10 or 11, me and my friends went to a small woodland area in the neighborhood to just explore and everything, though after a while we stumbled across an animal heart. No body, bones or anything we could see nearby, though it was clearly fresh. We later learned a kid in the area was a tiny psychopath and loved torturing animals around there, crucifying their bodies in his shed. He was found out after trying the same thing with his neighbor's new dog.
My grandma explaining to me she had a miscarriage a little while after her last child. Me being like 9 saying it was for the best because my mum, aunt and uncle were troublemakers, so it was better for her. She got extremely mad with me and I was so confused at the time, I didn't realize how messed up it actually was.
Geez, how exactly is a 9-year-old supposed to react to that kind of information?
My aunt called my mom one night saying she had locked her kids, 2 and 5, in the bathroom and for my mom to come get them because she had a stomach bug and was headed to the hospital. I was probably only 6 years old, so of course I believed it. I wasn't even supposed to hear the conversation to begin with, but I was a sneaky little poo. Turns out she was high as hell on meth and was having delusions of killing her kids and wanted to leave before she acted on it. Called her meth addict boyfriend to come pick her up and left my baby cousins locked in the bathroom at some random motel. Edit, since so many PPL are asking what happened. Mom went and got the kids. Didn't see aunt for about 2 weeks. Showed up at our house sober, at least we think. Took the kids home and didn't hear from her for a few months. Never got called about a situation again, but who knows what happened. She got clean about 4/5 of a year later, was diagnosed with BPD, refused any medical treatment, intensive therapy. Her husband at the time divorced her and got full custody of the kids. She is still dating said boyfriend who is on DG, but she claims she isn't on him. I really don't think she is. She also has a job now and her own apartment and looks great, but still sad to see that she's still with him. They physically abuse each other, and is living in her apartment somewhere in another state with him. None of her 6 kids talk to her and the 2 youngest are still in therapy to this day. All of her kids hate her and never fail to remind her when she attempts to reach out to them. Her 3rd youngest was diagnosed 2 years ago as a paranoid schizophrenic, so I'm not sure if that relates her mental disorder as well. I still communicate with her here and there. She actually called me this morning to check on me and my son. I'm 32 weeks pregnant. But it's so hard to hold a conversation with her. She starts rambling about how amazing her boyfriend is and how nobody could ever take away her happiness and how her kids can kiss her ass basically. I love her dearly but hate the person she is and hope she fixes all of her mistakes before she or her kids die.
Damn man. Meth is a destroyer of everything good.
She got clean but was diagnosed with a personality disorder and all 6 of her kids have no contact with her anymore, the youngest being 15. Pooh's sad to see.
My now dead uncle giving food to his father but not mother while she was blind and so hungry that she was soaking old bread in water to eat.
In kindergarten, one of my little classmates excitedly told me that her uncle, I don't remember specifically, was visiting and had promised to do his favorite thing, kiss her little tutu, genitalia. I didn't understand and wondered why anyone would want to do that. It took decades before I realized she was being molested. This was a kindergartner.
I remember having multiple sleepovers at my friend's house, and per her creepy dad, pajama dress code was strictly a t-shirt and no underwear to let it breathe. He also kicked my family dog. So yeah, F that guy.
I have a big family, aunts, uncles, cousins, ext, and whenever a reunion came around all the adults told us not to be alone with our grandfather, their own father. It turns out that he was a child molester, even his own kids couldn't escape him until adulthood. They lived in very rural Rocky Mountains where the closest neighbor was 5 miles away.
I hate that they still even allowed him at family functions. He doesn't deserve to be there.
A guy who was forced out of the church and none of the kids knew why. 30 years later he was arrested for pedophilia dating back to when he was kicked out of the church. All the kids loved him as he always showed a ton of interest in us. Turns out, the church covered for him to not lose face and he went on to molest more kids across the state for 30 more years. Here is the guy, link.
Special place in hell for these FS.
Dad and I were hunting along a logging road when we came across a cable that loggers put across to stop traffic. A few feet from the cable was dirt bike helmet. I went to pick it up but my dad stopped me. Turns out a guy was dirt biking and hit the wire and cut his head clean off. Dad didn't tell me until I was older.
After my parents divorced, my dad and I moved from Kansas to Georgia. We lived in a crappy one-bedroom apartment below someone's house. There was this tall cabinet in the kitchen, basically floor to ceiling, just empty space. We never had much food, so one day I went in there looking for food or cleaning utensils or something. It was full, and I mean full, of empty Bacardi bottles. The big ones too, with the handles. Enough Bacardi bottles to fill up the entire cabinet. This was probably a 7-foot-tall cabinet too. The kicker? We didn't even live there for a full year. It must have only been months that we were there and he amassed the collection. My dad is an alcoholic, to the point of getting absolutely wasted when he was supposed to be watching his 11-year-old child. I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back I am desperately sad for myself and my father. When I pass Bacardi bottles in the grocery store, I sometimes just stop and look at them. It's a very hollow and sad feeling.
Me, 4 to 5, and my sister, 8 to 9, were playing in the yard in front of our house when suddenly a hooded motorcyclist stopped in front of the driveway and didn't move for a while and just stood there. Suddenly he took out a gun and pointed it at us. I ran for cover, but my sister stayed in the yard and kept jumping rope because she didn't want to show him she was scared. I was scared to death for her. Then, fortunately, the motorcyclist drove on again. The interesting thing is that I and my sister both forgot about it for a few years after that, and both thought it was just a dream, until at some point I told her about it, and then to my surprise found out that she could remember it too, and it actually happened.
I grew up in Nigeria and once saw the results of a necklacing. Realized what I had seen when it happened in Max Payne 3. Edit. Just to clarify, I'm not Nigerian, just spent a few years growing up there as an expat kid.
Nigerian too. I saw it so many times growing up it was _normal to me. After I got on the internet, gore sites and Reddit, and read reactions from the larger public, I still found it a bit difficult to understand how big a deal it was to burn someone alive. In the back of my mind I used to rationalize that the victims were scum and deserved it. Took me years to grow out of that mentality. I moved out of the Pudi area I grew up in, spent time in the city and abroad. Last year, back in my town, I saw a charred corpse on the road for the first time in years. I still felt nothing. I hope I'm not irredeemably fed up in the head.
When I was 12, my dad cold turkey quit drinking, unaware that it wasn't the safest thing to do for a physically dependent alcoholic. I'll never forget him lying on the daybed in the TV room, asking me, "Why's Princess on the ceiling?" Princess was the neighbor's dog. My mom called an ambulance shortly after and got him taken to the hospital to be detoxed the right way. He was sober thereafter till the day he died. But in line with my family's fed up, or possibly healthy, motto of, "You gotta laugh or you'll cry," the bit about Princess is on the ceiling became a very dark family joke. Not referred to in front of my dad, because it hurt his feelings. It's only many years later in retrospect that I realize watching my dad hallucinating was probably pretty traumatic to me.
My stepdad leashed my brother's dog in our basement so tight that he had to stand on his hind legs to not get strangled. He brought me down there to show me and laughed about it.
My brother maintained it was normal to have cereal with water instead of milk, and that it was way better. I ate cereal with water like an idiot until I was about 16.
Oh, thank God for this comment. A little bit of brain bleach.
That my friend was being pimped out by the uncle she lived with, who was a cop who got kicked off the force. She had just moved to my town and in with her uncle. We hung out one time, she was cold and we went back to her house to grab her jacket. The house was a mess, kinda of gross, and not kept well. When I went into her room it was all red walls, fancy red bedspread, fancy red curtains, old antique-looking dresses and a big Chinese rug in the middle of the room. It looked like something out of a movie. She had condoms on the dresser, and I didn't know what they were and picked one up. She said what they were and I had no idea what she meant, and we left her room after she got her jacket. I thought it was weird she didn't have things I had in her room. On the way down her uncle walked in, asked if we were upstairs. Her bubbly voice said, yes. And he looked pissed. We played on the playground, got slush puppies, Slurpees, at the convenience store, and had fun hanging out. Perfect day. She didn't come to school the next Monday, then that week. I asked my teacher where she was, if she was sick. She said she moved. I came home really upset she didn't tell me goodbye. My mom asked me what was wrong. I told her about my friend moving and how we had a lot of fun the day we hung out. This was back in the 80s, kids played till it was dark then came home, our parents never knew what we were doing half the time. She asked what we did and I told her all about her room, how her house wasn't nice and I felt bad. But that we had a ball. My mom comforted me, then she went to talk to my dad downstairs. Couple years passed and I saw in our local paper her uncle was arrested. It was a couple-page town paper where they had stuff from my school, bake sales, any town news. We all looked at it hoping our photo was in there for sports or something. Her uncle was arrested for kidnapping. My friend's mom was trying to get her back. I think she was on DG, that's why she was with the uncle, and he didn't produce her for the court. A few days later my friend was found dead. Don't even remember her last name, I don't remember her uncle's name. But I remembered she said we couldn't stay out too late because she had to entertain company. I thought it was weird she talked like my grandma, but it all started piecing together. I found out she was being used for prostitution a few years later after that, when the uncle was up for parole or some poo. My mother told me my dad told his friend who was a cop what I saw. My dad knew her uncle was a piece of poo kicked off the force. I always wondered if that's why she moved, and it angers me to this day they didn't save her but let him send her somewhere else. One of my best childhood days with a great friend, Charlie, fed me up for life because we hung out when we were 11 years old. I'm a mom now, and it kills me even thinking about this poo 36 years later. I wish I had some street savvy, some smarts, but I was a kid who played with dolls and thought I would marry Duran Duran. I didn't know what any of the poo in her house meant.
My own childhood. The severity of my abuse wasn't clear to me until casually sharing old memories with friends, and I started learning that other kids didn't have to stand in the corner with their hands above their heads for hours.
My dad got laid off from a job and we started to really struggle for a year or so. He woke up early every morning to make breakfast for us all before school and cleaned the house while doing side jobs just so we would never know we were struggling. He couldn't get a basic job because he was overqualified.
This is happening currently. If I hadn't landed my current gig, next steps was strip my resume to look less qualified and capable.
A clown came to my birthday party. I was 2 and the clown pulled out what us kids thought was a water gun, but it was a real gun. He proceeded to take all the mom's watches and purses and left. This was in Mexico. Edit. Wow, it hasn't even been a day since I joined Reddit and I got a gold. Thanks, kind stranger.
Besides the terror of being held at gunpoint, that's a hilarious story to tell afterwards.
Thank you for watching. We upload new videos every day, so be sure to come back for more fun. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed the video.